Okay, so let's start talking a little bit more about what makes up the CNS and what makes up the PNS, and then we'll start organizing it functionally as well. So, if you are looking at the central nervous system, if you're looking at the brain, this is a coronal section of the brain, or the spinal cord. As I mentioned before, what you are generally going to have is this gray matter, and gray matter is made of, again, neuron cell bodies, glial cells, not all myelinated axons. So this makes up the gray matter, and you're seeing gray matter here. It's mostly around the outside of the brain, but there are also some chunks in the middle. Importantly, gray matter is, well, you want to protect your entire central nervous system, but since most neurons are amitotic, you definitely do not want to damage those. So, so the majority of the brain and the spinal cord is made up of this gray matter, which is neuron cell bodies and glial cells, and then the white matter. And the white matter, again, is what we call, it's the wiring between the gray matter. So you've got all these processors, and then you've got wiring between the processors. So what do you call this part? Well, it is white matter, but white matter is made up into tracts or pathways, TRACT, tracts or pathways. These are bundles of axons within the central nervous system, and it makes up the white matter. So please note again that there is a lot of white matter in the central nervous system. There's also a lot actually in the spinal cord that we're not showing here. So every sensation, going back, every sensation, if I felt it in my finger, would have to go to the central nervous system for integration, meaning there's no point in gathering information without telling the central nervous system about it. But importantly, and we'll talk about this in the next set of notes, you are only aware of sensations. You are only consciously aware of sensations that make it to your cerebral cortex. If it goes into your spinal cord and doesn't go to your cerebral cortex, you're never aware of it. If it goes to your medulla oblongata, you're never aware of it. So the most superficial 4 or 6 millimeters of your brain are really the only conscious portions of you that exist. So at the spinal cord level, there's definitely no awareness of what's going on. Okay, and then every single motor command, so if I wanted to now make my little finger actually do this, needs to come from the central nervous system. So you are in conscious control of like skeletal muscle most of the time. But you're not in conscious control of, for instance, glandular secretion or smooth muscle contraction or cardiac muscle contraction. So really the only tissue that you ever get to control voluntarily is your skeletal muscle. So every sensation comes to the central nervous system for integration. You're not necessarily aware of it. For instance, right now I'm monitoring my own blood pressure and my own blood pH, but I have no awareness of it. And then every motor command comes from the central nervous system, but I'm only under voluntary control of skeletal muscle most of the time. Okay, so the peripheral nervous system now is all other nervous tissue in the body. Any place other than the brain and the spinal cord, all of this is considered PNS tissues. So the PNS tissue is primarily made of wiring, because almost all the cells are in the central nervous system where they can be nice and protected. So what is going to and from sensory receptors and to and from muscles and to and from glands, it's primarily just wiring. So there are very few neuron cell bodies in the PNS. When they exist, they make these little lumps, and you can see the lumps right here. They're called ganglia. So those are called ganglia. But most of the peripheral nervous system is just these, which is what we call nerves. Okay, so let me show you what a nerve is. If I take this nerve, which is the biggest nerve in the body, called the sciatic nerve, and then look at what makes up that nerve, I will do a little cross-section of the nerve and see that it basically is just bundle after bundle after bundle of myelinated axons. But it has protective connective tissue wrappings around it that should sound familiar to you. For instance, the entire nerve is wrapped in connective tissue that protects it, called epineurium. And then the epineurium will fold in and divide the nerve into bundles of axons called fascicles. And you can see a fascicle right here, which is really cool. And the fascicle is wrapped in a thinner version of the epineurium called perineurium. And then the perineurium gets thinner and wraps around each individual little axon as endoneurium. So epi, peri, endoneurium, just like epi, peri, endomysium. These are the connective tissue layers around a nerve that protect the nerve. Okay, but again, the nerve is really no cell bodies. It's just wiring going to and from the cell bodies that are elsewhere. Okay, so that's epi, peri, and endoneurium. So now let me show you the major nerves in the body. Okay, so we will do this in detail later, but I want you to note that there's a limited number of on-ramps and off-ramps to the central nervous system, a limited number of places where you can get information in and information out. There are 12 pairs that connect directly to the brain. They're mostly involved with head stuff like sensation, like your special senses, vision, taste, that kind of stuff, but also controlling like facial muscles. That's controlled by one of these 12 pairs that are called cranial nerves. So the cranial nerves are nerves that go directly to and from the brain. And then there are 31 pairs of what we call spinal nerves that go directly to and from the spinal cord. And then every other nerve in the body has to connect to either a cranial or a spinal nerve eventually. Think of it like on-ramps and off-ramps to I-15, right? So you got to get on, you got to get off, and it's got to get, and there are a limited number of places that you can do that. So every single one of these teeny tiny little nerves, if you followed it, you could follow it to or from one of those cranial or spinal nerves. 12 pairs of cranial nerves, you'll learn them later, 31 pairs of spinal nerves. Those don't have individual names, they're just named for where they come out of the spinal cord, so they're not as hard as you would imagine. Every other smaller nerve in the body is a branch from a cranial nerve or a spinal nerve. And so now let's just start talking about what nerves do functionally. And this is going to be the first time you hear it, but it's not going to be the last time you hear it. Okay, so here's the deal. Nerves, wires, can be carrying information toward the central nervous system, away from the central nervous system, or it could be a bundle of wires. Some carried it in, some carried it out. Okay, so if this nerve right here, this is called the optic nerve. That optic nerve is very, very busy carrying information from the eye toward the brain. It is exclusively sensory. So the functional classifications of these nerves. This one is sensory, okay? Optic nerve. So it only contains wiring that's carrying information that direction. There is another one that's going out. Can't see it very well from this picture, but since the optic nerve is so busy carrying sensory information, I need a separate nerve to control like the motor activity of my eyes when I move them out. That's called the oculomotor nerve. That nerve is exclusively carrying information from the brain toward the muscles of the eye. Okay, that's called the oculomotor nerve, and it's exclusively motor. But then most of the nerves in your body, like this little guy right here, they have some of the wiring is carrying information in, okay, because so I can feel this occurring. But some of the information, some of the wiring is carrying information out, so I can do this. So this nerve that is actually going right here that you see is mixed in function. Not because each individual wire is mixed, but because some of the wires are carrying information in and some of the wires are carrying information out. They're not wires, they're axons, but still, okay? So that is the functional classification of peripheral nerves. They're either sensory, motor, or mixed, okay? And we will reinforce that a little bit later.